Today's lesson is going to be on adaptations. In order for any organism to survive, it has to be somehow adapted to its environment. So, for example, polar bears having thick fur to help them withstand the cold. As you might be aware by now, scientists love categories. They've put these adaptations into three main groups: those that are structural, behavioral, and functional. So we'll begin by taking a look at each of these groups with some examples. You'll need to be able to understand each type of adaptation so that you can identify them in a given scenario. So don't worry about trying to memorize the examples that I'll be using. Structural adaptations are the physical features that we see, like the organism's shape or color. For example, polar bears are large animals that live in Arctic climates. They need a good supply for fat and a low surface area to volume ratio, which both help them to minimize heat loss, and their white fur acts as camouflage. Behavioral adaptations, as its name suggests, are the ways in which an organism behaves or acts. Swallows and some other birds migrate and fly to warmer countries during the winter, which allows them to avoid the cold and lack of food in their summer homes. Another example would be elephants. They flap their ears back and forth and spray themselves with water. These are behavioral adaptations to the hot environment in which they live, because both of these behaviors are going to cool them down. And finally, functional adaptations. These are probably the hardest ones to recognize, as they relate to the processes going on inside an organism's body, like their metabolism and their reproductive system. For example, many desert animals conserve water by producing very little sweat and only small amounts of concentrated urine. Camels accumulate a lot of fat in their humps, which they can then break down later to release water. So now let's look at an example question. I've just underlined the key parts to the question. I just find that this helps you to not just understand what the question is asking, but stops you from going off track. So, animals and plants have features, adaptations, that allow them to survive in the conditions in which they normally live. Describe how animals and plants are adapted to survive in dry conditions such as deserts. For each adaptation that you give, describe how the adaptation helps the animal or plant to survive in dry conditions. To obtain full marks, you should refer to both animals and plants, 6 marks. So for a question like this that's 6 marks, we need to have 6 points. Probably 3 different adaptations, each with their own explanation. But just to be sure, we should try to do at least 4. And make sure, as the question states, to talk about both plants and animals to get the top marks. So let's look at some animal adaptations. A decrease in surface area containing sweat glands would result in a reduction in the area from which sweat or water may be lost from the body. A large surface area to volume ratio to radiate heat away from the body. These would be things like large ears. An animal may have a structure, such as a hump, which contains fat stores and allows fat to convert to water by the process of respiration. Long eyelashes allow the dust to be kept out of the eyes when it is blown by the wind. Large feet to stop the animal sinking into the sand. A nocturnal lifestyle, which allows organisms to keep out of the sun in the hottest parts of the day, which will reduce the amount of sweat lost. Now let's go on to some plant adaptations that you could mention. They have a decrease in surface area, such as leaves that are spikes, which result in reduced water loss by transpiration and evaporation. A widespread or extensive root network, which allow the plant to absorb more water and help survival in a hot, dry climate such as a desert. Finally, a fleshy or thick stem will also allow the plant to store water inside itself to be used at a later point. So I hope this has helped you to understand the 3 types of adaptations and how to approach an exam question on this topic.